Much like the game of Operation, but with burning instead of buzzing. Welcome back. Glad you guys could join me for part 2 of the Icon FJ44 Scale Replica series. Today I'm starting out by soldering all the parts that were installed in the previous video. I'm using a MAP gas torch and acid core silver solder. A little safety note, I do in fact wear a respirator. I wasn't in this video because I didn't want to sound like Darth Vader, but I did have the garage door open and used a fan above my workspace to blow the fumes out. So quite a while back I bought a resistance soldering unit specifically for this build. The advantage being that they generate heat only at the joint that you're working on, so already soldered parts won't fall off while you're adding new stuff. I ended up dropping the handpiece and broke the carbon electrode tip, so I resorted to using the MAP gas torch. It'll easily get me through the rest of the chassis work, and I can order some more electrodes and try and capture some more detailed soldering later on. So soldering, as you can see, it's pretty simple stuff. Clean both surfaces really well, heat the thick stuff first, the thin stuff second, and hit it with solder when it's hot until it breaches the seams. So I had a few people mention the jig the chassis is sitting in. This is actually the second of two. The first had many more contact points because I needed to bend the frame rails, and I was really concerned about everything staying straight. So this, the second one, is way simple. The chassis just stays true during soldering. It settles nicely into the notches as it cools. They're also really handy while mocking up suspension and doing final assembly. And they just really help keep the build organized. My weekend morning commute from my hobby room and office to what so far is my workshop area in our new reno. I'll try and show some shop and tool updates in the coming videos if I can manage to squeeze them in. Okay, so just a quick once over to check out the work from the night before. Everything felt way more solid once I had the extra pieces soldered on. And I'm not sure what this next bit was about. It kind of looks like I'm reassuring a patient that they're in good hands, which they're clearly not. I really like this part of the process. I start to trim away the excess brass plate and bolts. Each step gets a little closer to looking like the parts are welded to the frame, like the real thing. A pretty simple tool setup for this part. It's my old beaten up rotary tool and Dremel brand cutoff wheels. And I say Dremel brand because the cheap discs easily become projectiles if you're not really careful. The better quality discs also allow me to gently use them for grinding on some of the softer metals. Also, I try to avoid the areas with larger amounts of solder when I can. It seems to melt through the solder almost as much as it cuts through, and it really plugs up the cutoff wheels. Anyways, in the next step, there's an easier way to handle that. And I know things look a little messy right now, but stick with me, it cleans up pretty well. An easy way to ditch the excess solder, I use a hobby knife and carefully cut out any unwanted material. Again, this keeps the cutoff wheels clean and saves a bunch of time filing it off later. I also don't have to compromise any welds by doing a bunch of reheating. And it's really easy to get nice joints and seams as I'm able to cut everything square. Later on, these bolt heads will probably get a bit of surface heat using my mini torch, and that'll just soften up any rough edges and save a little bit of time prepping. Much of this stuff will still need to be reworked as I add more pieces. It won't be the last time I have to do it, but it'll probably be the last to make you guys watch so much of it. So I spent a bunch of time filing, but this is where you get to see things clean up quite a bit. And as for the files I used, there's a pretty wide variety here, but I only really need a handful of them for this type of work. Just a few different profiles to get in tight spots, while still retaining the shape of whatever I'm carving away at. I'll start dropping links into these video descriptions to any of the tools I use in case you guys want to check them out or maybe use them for yourselves. Most of the areas where the parts and the mounts join to the frame rails will now start looking a lot more like they're part of the chassis or like they're welded to it. It's just a nice opportunity to clean up the work and also make for less sanding in the coming steps. So before getting to the sanding part of things, I'm using a steel wire wheel on the rotary tool to clean up and the little nooks and crannies. Just the spots that are tricky to get into with sandpaper and files. It cleans it up nice, it takes the tarnish off of things. It also helps deburr any rough edges on any of the soldered bits that were hard to either cut away or file off. I do most of my heavier sanding using emery paper and cloth. This stuff is 240 grit to be exact. It does most of the work and doesn't use a bunch of material. I was out of the cloth stuff, so paper it is in this case. Again, both work, but I do prefer the cloth as it conforms to all the little tiny shapes really well. Lastly, I follow up with these 400 grit sanding sponges. They're sold at most home centers and auto supply spots. They last quite well and they really clean up the brass nice. So just to wrap this up, I knew after the last video somebody had told me to buy a drill press, and you did. So far the tools may seem a little primitive, but I do have some pretty nice mini and specialty tools in the hobby room and soon to be in the shop as well. I will add a small drill press and other items, but I'll do it as I can afford it and as the space allows. But for now, I'll just make do. Might actually be fun to turn out a few shop videos as things progress. Let me know in the comments if you guys would dig watching something like that. So I'll tidy up, I'll get the band-aids out for the next video. Take a second to subscribe and like if you want to, and thanks for watching.